You don't need to orchestrate.
Are you going to give me a 10-minute opening statement?
Yeah. Yeah, we have our 10-minute scripts ready to go, and then we have our 5-minute scripts ready to go, and our 60-second scripts ready to go. So.
All right. Well, so our first big long conversation was about the industry and debates, and now you have taken it upon yourself to be the host, the social media debate host.
Yeah.
At least for me and Scientific Snitch.
Right.
So I'm just curious, what your kind of initial feedback is after going through that process, and we did the first one and the second one, of kind of, because before, I think, one of your criticisms of my debate with Paul Carter was they're talking about traps for 3 hours or whatever, and guess what? You got 3 hours of us talking about biasing the lats. So, right? So I'm curious if that makes you look back at the whole idea of hey, there can be a lot of discussion around what some people might consider a mundane topic, but also just how that conversation went and how productive or unproductive you thought it was.
I thought both I'll say it. I think both conversations were horribly unproductive. But I think it came from, so my intention behind wanting to host debates was I want healthy debate in this industry, because I don't think bickering and arguing and throwing ad hominems at one another and then stitching one another really makes for kind of open discourse. It doesn't work. It's the same thing when you have an argument with a significant other. The best way to do that is just hash it out face to face, not texting back and forth or sending letters. And so I really wanted to kind of create a space to do that. And my hope was that we could ask questions, bounce ideas off of one another, and then hopefully come to either an agree to disagree at the end, or hey, maybe my opinion changed a little bit, or hey, maybe I learned something new and now my opinion changed. That didn't happen. And I think it was because of the intent. I think Scientific Snitch came in, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm going to do everything I can to prove you wrong. Even if I am blatantly wrong, I'm still going to hold my stance. And so I think my opinion has changed. I don't know if it's possible to have open discourse, maybe just not with certain people. You know what I mean?
That's the conclusion that I've basically come is you have to have a good dance partner. Both people have to have the same objective going in, being that our goal is that we're trying to hash out a deeper truth off this topic, and therefore when I go in, I value what you're bringing into this. Even if I disagree, I value the fact that you're bringing a side of this question to be able to discuss, right? Whether it's you're bringing in different evidence or a different perspective on the evidence, et cetera, and we can discuss that. And that doesn't mean that people need to come into an agreement. It just means that everything that you're discussing, I'm listening to, and I'm not going to ignore it. I want to consider it to whether, and maybe what the other person says, you think, wow, I'm much more right than I even thought I was, because it doesn't make sense. Or it makes you be hey, maybe I should be a little bit more cautious with my position, because while I believe or I feel very strongly that it's this, I can't say with this certainty. I don't have the evidence to prove it, and this is a valid criticism, even if I don't think it plays out that way.
Yeah.
So when you have two people that are kind of trying to achieve that, yes, it can happen, but I don't think most people are in a place, especially those that are the most vocal on social media, where their goal is to find the truth. I think more is their goal is to have a persona for their audience, which usually doesn't involve ever, seceding any wrong relative to another person. Some people be oh, I was wrong about this. And if you look at the pattern, usually it's when it no longer matters, or when enough time has passed, where it's just I feel I can come out and I can go with the wave that we're going in now.
Yeah.
And this is happening so much. There's this huge grifts from like the quote unquote like science-based community where like everybody's coming out and acting like, well, I was always, with a sensible amount of volume or whatever. I never said that you were a dumbass if you trained more than 8 reps or like, I'm like, really?
Well, that's the beautiful thing about Instagram is we have a paper trail.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I really think that whether good debate is possible in this industry or any other, it just depends on whether or not the two people are objective. And from an entertainment perspective, like if you follow anything on politics, people are happy to debate where they're just talking past each other and saying their talking points with no intention of really ever listening to the other person. Yeah. And what you get is you get both sides watch that and think their team won because they're doing the same thing. They're pretty much listening to the one side and really not open to hearing what the other side is saying anyway.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, I think we're kind of already at a disadvantage where, again, it depends on the person coming into the debate, but you're kind of already at a disadvantage where you're just trying to look more right to your audience and just trying to hold yourself up to your audience to make yourself look even right. And then you're using sound bites of whenever you made your talking points and not the other talking points of the other person. So, another thing that I noticed with the debate was you had your audience that was commenting on the debates, and then you had Snitch's audience commenting on the debates, and more so her side was more just attacking you personally as opposed to attacking your talking points, versus your audience was attacking her talking points, not so much her as a person. And so I think that also speaks volumes of like who you attract to who watches your stuff. You're not attracting like what would I say? Like the vindictive, how do I put this nicely? You're not you don't attract just the negative people who just want to bully other creators in the comments, I think, you know.
Probably some that also has to do with there's probably an education gap between like me being an educator in the space that's established. Like most of the people, like a big portion of my audience is professionals in the space, so they are more knowledgeable on the topics, which then means they can have their opinions on those more specific details. And I think that's always one of the biggest problems when you're debating is if you're debating in front of an audience that doesn't understand the subject, they don't really know who to believe or what to listen to unless you really slow teach it through the process of the debate, which usually there's not enough time to do that. And so I think that was probably part of it. So I wouldn't say that like, okay, it's just that my followers are more kind or or whatever. I would think the part of it is that they probably had more of the tools to be able to comment on the substance of the debate, whereas if you can't really make an argument or form a good opinion on the substance, well, you're pretty much left with just the personal stuff. And that happens with the debaters too, when it's like, okay, I don't really have an opposition to your argument, so I'm either just going to change the subject or attack you personally, use ad hominems, etc.
If you were to have it a different way, let's say that your opponent was the same person, let's just say scientific research, how would you have orchestrated the discussion so it was a little more productive or a little more fruitful?
Well, I think the best thing that you can do is you make the discussion follow the evidence and topics. So the first debate we did, what I tried to do was be like, okay, here's the study, here's what you said about it, here's why I disagree with that. So that the conversation kind of has to stay in that ecosystem and can't really, like it's both of us, instead of I say something at you, you say something at me, it's here's the piece of evidence that we're going to discuss now, here's how I view it, here's how you view it, and hopefully both of us can focus more on the piece of evidence than each other, right? And even our respective views, it can be like, well, you see it this way, here's where I disagree, but it stays on that context. And then you move to the next point and the next point and the next one. And essentially what you do is then for the audience, they can weigh kind of what they think about that piece of evidence and the two arguments for one at a time, at a time, at a time. If the conversation is not structured like that, it allows the debaters to go all over the place. It opens the space for you to get off topic, and also for the audience, it's very hard to follow.
Sure.
You know, so if you ask like what could I have done differently, I mean the main thing that I would do is I would have continued that format to the completion of the conversation on all things.
Yeah. Instead of like on the second one, completely changing the format.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, because was it your idea or her idea?
It was my idea.
Yeah.
I was coming at it from like my days in like debate club, where you had an opening statement, the other person had an opening statement, and I thought it was going to give both parties an equal opportunity to share their opinions, but actually what just ended up happening is I think it just made the conversation more inflamed, and it just turned into a mess at the end. So yeah, looking back, and I got some rightful comments of saying this was a shit show. Like this host is horrible, and I'm like, I accept that. But yeah, I think if I were to ever do this again, number one, I think I would pick the subjects a little bit better. I don't think I would pick someone especially who's just looking to argue. But number two, lead it in a more organic direction, and then I would essentially just hold my stance of, okay, we are going to stay on this topic until it's resolved without going in circles, and then we can move to the next one, as opposed to just having 10 minutes of word vomit, 10 minutes of word vomit, and then just trying to go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best role for the debater is, if you can keep people on topic, is when things start to circle, it's like your job is to come in and break the circle and then make people like, hey, without repeating, do you have an additional point?
Bear down on this.
You know, it's like, all right, like you've said that like more than one time or whatever. Do you have a new thing to add to it or whatever, or do you have a final stance that you'd like to put on it, and you get that kind of closure? Because a lot of times that's what happens if you're not there to listen, you'll just keep repeating your thing. And I think that especially happens when somebody doesn't understand the subject matter to have a conversation where you're reacting to the other person said.
Yeah.
So you just keep repeating the thing you originally said, versus like I say a thing and then you respond. I don't respond to your response. I just say my thing again. Yeah. And then your only choice is to repeat the response that you had the first time. And then
that's the circle.
Right? And it's like, okay, we're not having a dialogue here. It's you're not able to respond to my response, and now where does the conversation go? Because you know, you're not giving me anything else to go off of, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I think, you know, in addition to staying on the topics like one at a time, the biggest problem with like having like, oh, you have this much time, is you have to allow another person to respond in a timely fashion on a point. One, for the audience to be able to keep track of it, but also for the debaters. Like if I sat here and I gave you a lecture for 10 minutes, okay, and then I'm like, okay, you respond. How much of that 10 minutes can you realistically react to, even if I gave you an unlimited amount of time? And it's probably like 10 to 20%.
Sure.
Right? Because you're trying to process that information and then also think of like how you're going to respond, and you can just only remember so much when you're actually listening to process something.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's more multitasking at that point, because I've seen some debaters where they're as the other person is talking, they are typing and taking notes like at a rapid rate.
Yeah. That's why I didn't actually look at her slides. I just listened, and then I just made some bullet points of things to cover.
Yeah.
And going back at it, I realized that was a huge mistake on my part, because there were just so many golden nuggets in those slides that I could have responded to.
Yeah.
And I would say I do my best to steel man the person's argument in front of me. So I think I gave some of Ella's critiques, I looked at them through my lens of if I was creating the argument of myself, and I responded to them like that, which I think is a better place of me continuing the conversation. But could I have had a more like beating her debate performance if I would have just responded to what she actually said and what she put on the slides, versus me trying to look at her argument in the best possible light as if I was making it? Because I look back and it's like, I'm actually arguing against what my own position on the limitations is here.
Right.
And she actually didn't make some of those points. Some of the points that she made were just close enough to that I just decided to roll with responding to what I thought would be the most valid criticisms.
Yeah.
You know?
I think another reason why I wanted to change the format was, I just remembered this. After the first debate went up, Elle messaged me. She said, thanks for holding the debate. She made some criticism. She said, Kas spoke the majority of the time. I wanted more time to speak. And I took that as, okay, well, let's change the format. But I think upon further reflection, you should have just maybe had more strong points to speak.
Yeah, she had the opportunity, she had as many opportunities, she just chose to speak less at each one of those points, right? This is why I don't like the time thing, because it's like, all right, if you give people, you have this much amount of time, it may not be enough, or some people will just fill it in with things to say that they don't really need to say or whatever. And so I think it's more like, hey, everybody needs the same opportunities to speak, rather than we need to have a balanced amount of time. Especially like whoever's leading the topic and laying out the foundation, well, they obviously have a certain amount of time of saying the thing, and then cool, if I'm just responding to that, I don't have to re-summarize the whole thing. Or maybe I do. Maybe I have to go into more nuance, because sometimes to pull somebody's argument apart, you have to break their argument apart piece by piece, which means it's going to take you 2 or 3 times as long to go through that. So I look at like what it should be is like everybody has an equal opportunity to respond, and time really shouldn't be the factor as long as somebody is staying on topic.
Yeah, it's more of the quality, the quality of the discussion as opposed to the quantity of the time that they're speaking.
Right.
Yeah,
but I just think it's ironic that she's like, I didn't have time, when she basically concluded, like, I'm done speaking at every one of her intervals. So the person that's responsible for her not speaking more is only her. She could have talked more about any of those studies or any of those topics. I think the reality is she just wasn't prepared to respond to any of those things. And like I said, I think that's a big difference between when, you can make a post, you can like, okay, I have these things, I can write it down. There's a different level of understanding needed for that versus being able to have a back and forth where if somebody says something, you understand the material enough that like, actually what you said, I'm gonna create these counter arguments with it.
You can take as much time as you want to create a carousel coming back at somebody, but it's a completely different level of comprehension to actually have a discussion about it.
Well, you also just simply don't need to know as much to put out bullet points as you do to respond to criticisms or questions about those bullet points.
Totally. Yeah.
So your overall thought was both of them were unproductive, right? So my question is, do you think there was any value gained from them? And what do you think, like, in terms of like what are your takeaways on the actual topic, and what do you think like the overall audience consensus was?
Well, the overall audience consensus was, I think, you can functionally differentiate the lats. I think there was a takeaway where you both agreed that you should have a vertical pole and a horizontal pole, and I think that's probably where the agreements ended.
Yeah, I think her to just to not misrepresent her, I think she was coming into this with like, should you pull sagittal and frontal, and for the circle of people that she's in, that there's just an origin for whatever reason that became the emphasis on how to differentiate the lats because of that one Ackland graph that Chris Beardsley showed or whatever, which we won't get into the limitations of that too. But I mean, I think it's just an example of like, okay, you shouldn't create your whole theory around training around one piece of evidence, because there's a lot more, like we did a lot of exercises this weekend. There's a lot more ways to vary a pole than just whether it's in front or it's on the side, right? Totally. So why would we constrain the differentiation to those two things? But but I think she was coming in with her view of how you would differentiate them would be whether you pull in the front to the side, and mine was like, well, whether you would pull from vertical or horizontal. So we had different sides of the arguments, but also she was looking at it through the lens of different application than I was as well.
I see. Yeah. Right. I think another thing too was, obviously, like the whole reason we were debating it was because there isn't a substantial amount of evidence to show your side or her side. That's the whole reason we're arguing or debating. But I think where you came from, where the evidence lacked, you made up with the anecdotes. Like you actually showed, here are the clients that have brought up the lower lats, and I think that the anecdotes hold weight because your particular clients measure every variable. Like, I think that's one of the reasons why I think anecdotes, particularly in bodybuilding, have a little more weight than just outside anecdotes, because bodybuilders track everything. They monitor everything, and so that helps to isolate the variables. So yeah, that's where I think it's where you kind of came in, is like, yeah, we have scant evidence here, but here's what we've seen in practical application, as opposed to just speaking off of what we see in the papers and just speaking of pure speculations.
Yeah.
So.
And I think most people could probably learn from taking that approach of like, in the absence of evidence in the research, you should look to the field for the best source of evidence that's there, and still use caution, because anecdote still has its limitations, but research also has its limitations. Like, the way I try and communicate is research is usually the least contextual evidence, meaning like, okay, cool, this is a controlled environment, we control for variables, but also it's like, it's a specific population, a duration, and study design or whatever. So cool, whatever happened to the study may not at all actually be relevant to you. Anecdotes they're the exact context of you if they're personal anecdotes, because guess what? It's every variable is specific to what you are doing, right? But we have the least confidence in cause and effect because it's hard to know how all of those variables interact. So it's like both of these pieces of evidence, I don't look at them as one is good or the other one is bad, as much as like they're very different. One is, okay, I'm confident in these aspects of it. The other, I'm confident in these aspects of it. So if you have an exercise that's working for you and it isn't supported by the research, I can be like, I don't know why, but it's working for you. So I'm not going to be like, let's not do it because the research says it shouldn't work for you, so to speak. And I think a lot of people, especially now, what they tend to do is when the research doesn't fill it, they fill in that absence of evidence with really low quality or out of context research evidence, which I think is a much worse choice than, hey, if we have absence in the research, let's look at what the experts in the field, let's look at what the experience of the people that have been doing this are as the best way to fill in those gaps until we have better quality.
Yeah, and it's going back to your example, I don't know why. It could just be, I don't know why yet. Like, we just may not have the resources to understand it yet. I mean, I think it was Stan Efferding that said that exercise science is always 10 years behind of what is actually working. Like the Russian Olympic weightlifters, they were doing things that were just barely confirmed. They were doing things in the 90s that were just barely confirmed in the 2000s. It's not like it all of a sudden just started working in the 2000s. They just caught up with, okay, this is why it's working. Yeah. So
it always takes longer to figure out the why, and that's true in all things, right? Like we brought up the low carb thing or whatever. Like, okay, for a long period, people were like, oh yeah, they thought there was all these mechanisms of why, low carb diets were better for fat loss. And a lot of coaches applied that stuff in the field and had good results with them. And obviously some people didn't, right? But they were getting results despite being completely wrong on why it was working. Right? And so there's going to be tons of instances of that in anything with a practical field. It's like, we're going to find things that seem to correlate with a result, and we're not going to understand. We're just going to have hypothesis of why. And there's going to be this huge lag. As a coach, as a practitioner, we shouldn't get too tied up in, all right, something works and we don't know exactly why. That shouldn't make us feel too afraid to use it. The nice thing about when we do know why is it allows us to then apply that variable with more nuance, right? So like the more we learn about training variables like volume and frequency and intensity and whatever, the more we can start pulling those levers differently in different situations or for different clients, right? But it's like, okay, do we know the exact mechanism of why maybe a lengthened biased exercise might work a little bit better? Or do we know the exact mechanism of why training closer to failure? Like, we have an effective reps theory, we have all of these quote unquote theories, but the exact answer, we're not sure. We just have the best theories that we currently use to be able to apply it in practice. So it's like, okay, if I'm looking at the effective reps theory and I'm using that as like, all right, that's how I'm going to look at applying effort in training, well, that affects now how I'm going to do it. But if that theory proves to be wrong and something else is, we're probably not gonna get to a state where we no longer have people train hard, but we might start applying it slightly differently.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, even just like Brett Contreras just really talked about this new study, literally just came out this year, about we might be wrong about the insertion points of the glutes. I don't know if you saw it, but that doesn't really change anything about how we train the glutes, at least yet, you know? So the glutes still can be trained the way that they've been trained for the last 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah, like we have all these anecdotes of people doing these exercises and they're growing their glutes, or you know, maybe we have, you know, proxy evidence of them also, you know, looking like they're good for glutes. So it could be that there's slight variations. Like, how many heads of the biceps did we cover?
Well, we covered
the long head and the short head, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We have found out that there's multiple slips of the biceps, right? Like a lot of people have one that comes up and attaches either to the to the pec, or even all the way up into the clavicle sometimes. Guess what? That doesn't change how we're going to train the biceps per se,
right?
You know, but it's like, okay, that's a cool factoid of knowing that. So, but if we found something completely different, it could be like we discovered a region that, hey, this offers a new exercise variation that we could throw in there because now there's a range of motion or a function that we haven't been considering that maybe we should.
Yeah.
Right. But there's going to be only a small amount of things like that come about given where we are currently with our understanding now. But still, like, I mean, the fifth quad, I think, was discovered in 2018 or whatever, right? Yeah. You know, so that's not ancient history. Like, there's been a lot of dissections before they're like, oh yeah, there's actually 5 quads, right? So we still haven't named them the pents, but you know, they're still the quads.
The pentaceps. That sounds pretty cool. So why do you think? Because I've always had a problem with this. Why do you think, especially the young TikTok audience, treats these studies as gospel when they're talking about it online? Because I'm appreciative that they're kind of getting more fire these days, but like, why do you think they have to treat them with so much weight as opposed to just seeing them for what they are? Like, this is cool. This could maybe change some things for us.
Well, I think for one, like, the more absolute statements you make, the more viral the content is, because basically people are going to usually have a strong opinion one way or another, and you're going to get reactions from both if you make an absolute statement. If you make a cautious statement, then neither side really cares.
It's not going to pop off.
You know, the other thing I think is that I think a lot of these people are looking for, like, utilizing a research as a way to kind of like get clout or establish some credibility. And so what they're doing is like, hey, here's proof that I'm right and I know what I'm doing, and et cetera, because they don't have the actual evidence in their own physique or their client history, et cetera.
That's what I was kind of going. That's what I was kind of thinking, is like, they clearly are lacking somewhere else, so they feel they have to make up for it.
It's the same thing I talked about researchers, like they're filling an absence of evidence with poor quality. So they're using research as a way to fill the absence of evidence of their knowledge or credibility, you know, as a coach.
Makes sense.
Right? I think you said they're like, all right, I think you're like, I'm never doing this again in terms of the debate thing.
Yeah.
So, like, if you're talking, if you're trying to give me advice in terms of dealing with the industry, right? Because last time I think it was more a position as you're kind of like asking me, like, what should we do about this and how do we go forward, right? Like, having been on the other side, like, do you have feedback for me of like how I should go about this? Because there's plenty of topics. I do hate that because of the way that, we'll say, science is being miscommunicated, we're having to have discussions on social media platforms that don't really belong there or do well there, or even if you like get them there, do they really reach the people that need to see them? Like, if I do a 20 slide post, right, that's covering a topic, because that's what it takes. If somebody can just make some ridiculous claim. Yeah. And should I just be like, you know what, let me just make the claim in the opposite direction and not take any of the effort to go through the nuances and just be like, hey, they're team this, I'm team that? Because that seems to be the that seems to be the way to make it on social. Versus if you're like, hey, let me actually break this down to provide the strong case of why that is wrong and this is right. My experience, while I end up doing it anyway, just because, I don't know, I'm a sadist or whatever, is that the ROI is poor, and I'm not sure that it reaches much. Like, if I make a post like that, what are the odds that any of the people on the opposite side of the argument are going to see that? Because it's not going to reach any sort of virility. So it just kind of sits with a small portion of my audience that are probably the people that are the least likely to need that argument.
I'd probably already agree with what you say anyway. So you're asking, what advice can I give you to?
How do you think I should approach these topics of debate? Should we continue to do them through debate or other means?
The problem is, and granted, I've only held 2 debates with the same person, same people, and so maybe my opinion will change if I do more. Maybe, if I want to do it. But I think the attention span on particularly these more short form content platforms is so short. I'm not sure that you're going to be able to educate your stance in an ample amount of time before you just completely lose them. So I was just kind of thinking of like a content strategy that would probably be more beneficial, where you stitch or react to the claim that is wrong, and then you back it up with a more long form. So let's say that you stitch somebody who says something clearly wrong or something that you disagree with. You make a reaction, explain just kind of like the high level points, and then, hey, look, if you want more details on this, I have my post kind of going more into detail over on my blog or on our website, or I have a 20-page slide, something like that. So it's like you at least open up the avenue where if you still don't agree, if you still don't quite see my points, go read this. I hate to bring up Joel Sieben, but a couple of years ago, I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago, when his whole 90-degree squat thing came out, and he was completely flamed for it. So he did that. He created like a series of very small 60-second videos. Everybody flamed him for it, and his response was, in every reply to the comment, go read the article. And it was a 20-page article backing up his stance. Did I read it? No, I'm not interested. But he did that though, so at least he provided some avenue to back up his claim. I wonder if maybe something like that would be more beneficial.
So segregate the short-term stuff away from the long format, so that the long format doesn't kind of like punish you in the algorithm.
Yeah, because I mean, Instagram and TikTok, they're not designed for long form.
Yeah.
And the only people who would read long form on Instagram are the ones that are pretty much already bought into you anyway. So I think that's why platforms like Substack, and YouTube's been around for 20 years now. I think redirecting them to more favorable long form platforms is probably better. And like those people who are more interested in the topic and interested to learn will go to those platforms anyway.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think you'll appeal to everybody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? Is, my goal has never been to appeal to everybody. It's to appeal to the people that I could actually make a difference to. Right. Which is why I've been kind of stickler of like, I'm going to do the 20-page slide, and if anything, hopefully what that's going to do is the niche that I find is more of the people that would actually be willing to do that. They're people that, if they are consuming this type of content, they're the people that are willing to read and invest in that. And, because my ideal customer is not the person that, is just swiping everything and looking at, 10-second stuff or whatever.
No.
Right? Like, I mean, if you're a coach or a trainer and you're getting fitness information from people that post, just 60 or 90-second or 15-second things or whatever, it's like, all right, you're not a coach. You're just a flesh component of fitness TikTok that regurgitates the social media to the client, right? It's like you're a scroller by proxy for the client, so to speak, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of it's a tricky situation if you want to uphold your standard as an education platform, I don't know if you can really engage the same way that these kids engage and still uphold yourself as kind of like the standard. Because like there are people who, I don't know if we can name them, but there are people who do, when they disagree, they do lash out, and they only sum up their argument in that small reel. Not much depth to it, but they sure solidified a good chunk of following and got a lot more cult followers from it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's interesting to you or not.
But I mean, I would say, from a cause and effect perspective, I think that's probably one of the causes of why that part of the industry has degraded as much as it has, right? Because you just have this monkey see, monkey do thing that has just downward spiraled over the last like 3, ish years, I think.
I've seen it
really
really.
kind of the pattern.
I've seen it really just kind of go down the dumps after, like around COVID.
Yeah.
Like, ever since then. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else you want to go over?
Not unless you just want to go through some of the hit piece stuff. So we don't have to do that.
Do you have the hits piece stuff?
So
right now?
I mean, I have things. Right, I haven't done like the Paul Carter thing where I've dug through whatever.
We could do that.
Right,
we could put another one together because that was actually kind of fun for me.
Yeah, we can do that. We
could line that up. So
I mean, the big things are, one, her just being like, what's going on with the language thing, and how does that transfer over to the fact that she's repeating things multiple times. Her partner's also saying it, and they're also not making the effort to correct them.
I would feel if I had the condition that she says she has, I would be even more cautious with the things that I would say online.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be leaning into that as an excuse.
Yeah, and I don't see why you would ever be like, oh yeah, that was wrong, but I've just left it up, right? When I said it wrongly, I used it as an essential part of my argument, but I'm not going to go back and correct it, even though that was wrong.
That's dishonest,
right? So that was that's one big part. The other one is the whole like emailing to her, professors thing and stuff or whatever.
You guys don't know about this, but that whole professor thing, behind the scenes, was a shit show. So
but she took. Like, I didn't even pay attention to this in the debate, but she took an image that I intentionally drew as wrong with a text on the side of here's here's why this is not correct. And that's what she sent to her professors to get the quote that yes, these lines of force are wrong, or these force vectors are incorrect. And obviously, I don't have the whole conversation. I only have what she shared with us or whatever. Yeah. But that's what it appears like, And there's all sorts of manipulations in the communication or whatever. Like for instance, she asked if I could draw a moment arm, and if you ask if I can draw a moment arm, well, then guess what? I'm going to do the process where we're doing that. She didn't ask if I could calculate all of those forces, and stuff like that. She did ask, like, hey, when I drew it, it's like, she asked, like, do you calculate the inverse kinematics or whatever? And my response was like, to draw the moment arm, no, but if I want to calculate all the net forces, yes. And that, it's like that was completely left out of the conversation. And the next slide in that same post that she took from covers a better job of looking at the limitations than what she presented in the debate herself. Versus her thing was like, you just did the math wrong. When in reality, it's like, you asked me to draw it. There was no math involved in what the representation I was showing you, and you didn't probably discuss the context or the limitations with the professor, which in that little snippet of the email, the professor's like, yeah, he's right about this, and he's referring to the text that I had on the side, but of course, that didn't get mentioned. So this is why I'm like, fuck, I should have been paying attention to looking at the slides, rather than just listening to her, because I would have saw that and and I don't want to, I have agreed not to disclose any of the conversations that I've had with people, because they don't want any this drama. Nobody that's teaching biomechanics at university or anything else.
They don't want anything.
They don't want anything to do with to the point where I even offered to hire them to hey, find somebody, hire them. We can, to do one of these models or whatever or something like that. And they want to be so far away from any of this type of stuff. They're like, yeah, no, I can see how like this is going to be used and whatever, and I'm just like uncomfortable with that. But it also like I found it interesting that she was so adamant that we couldn't speak to the people that she spoke to.
Sure, I thought that was strange.
Yeah. And my best guess is that I'm guessing how she approached asking the question was to solicit a specific response, and that it would look very bad for her if we reached out and said, hey, I would like to follow up on this conversation,
Right.
and here's where it's coming from.
Right.
I imagine that, it would paint her in a very bad light.
It would,
But,
yeah.
yeah.
That's kind of like the only thing that I can come up with too, because I would imagine if you were not threatened by what you spoke with your professors, you'd be like, yeah, sure, you can see the whole thread that we talked about, and like you would be completely fine with that instead of
Yeah.
just nitpicking little sections that agree with your side.
Yeah.
So I thought that whole thing was extremely weird. So, but yeah, I'm down to do a hit piece.
Yeah, those are the big things. I don't really. I mean, if you want to, you could find little things off topic that are like character, flaws, or just like poor behavior and ad hominem stuff or whatever. But it's like I don't really care. Like mostly what I care about is like the debate stuff.
I omitted that kind of stuff when we had our Paul Carter thing.
Yeah.
I try to omit the character stuff as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but try to stick to the facts.
Yeah.
Anyway. Cool. Well, another good conversation, man.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.